we are going to talk about sex, sexuality, and gender. These three components or variables, or however you'd like to call them, are such an important makeup of who we are as individuals. And while they may influence our behavior, our interaction with others, and our social structure, I think that it's very important and even more important to recognize that the influence that these three variables have on our perception of self and of our self worth. And these are extremely important. So let's start with sex. When we talk about sex, we mean two things. We could mean sex as a verb, meaning having sex or to have sex, which is a wonderful way to connect with others. It's essential for procreation of the species, but it's also a sensual pleasure. It produces love, joy, comfort, excitement, and ecstasy. But when we talk about sex as a noun, we are talking about the biological characteristics of a person that are determined at conception. So we're asking, or we're looking at whether they're male or female. A person's sex is often confused with gender, and the two are not the same. Most researchers today understand gender as being influenced by a number of variables, including biology, but also environment and society. So, what does this mean? Well, suppose a person is biologically female. This means that their sex is female. Yet, they do not identify as female for a number of factors, including biological, environmental, and societal. And they are said to then experience gender dysphoria. That's the clinical term for it. Gender dysphoria is when a person experiences a disconnect between their primary and secondary sex traits. And there's this disconnect between the gender that they are assigned based upon their sex and the gender in which they identify. This person may identify as being transgender or may be classified as being transgender. But we should discuss that a little bit since there's still a lot of uncertainty of what transgender is. A transgender person is someone who has a different self-concept, or they have a self-concept that's different than their biological sex. And they desire to, or perhaps they already have, made a transition to live as the other sex. And it's from the word transition that we get the word trans, part of the trans part of transgender. And the transition can refer to either socially or physically transitioning. Now, I want to caution everyone listening not to confuse cross-dressing with being transgender. Cross-dressing is considered a kink or a fetish, and for some people a paycheck. But this is not transgender. Cisgender refers to a person whose self-concept is the same as their biological sex. So they were born with the genitalia of a particular sex, and they also identify as that particular sex. Now, if you are a cisgender individual, and if you think about the definition for a moment, being born with a particular genitalia of a particular sex and identifying as that particular sex. If you think of this definition of having the genitalia of a sex that you don't identify with, which is the definition of transgender, if you think about that, then you have to understand the difficulty and confusion that a transgender individual goes through internally not to mention socially. So it's very important to be compassionate. There are also individuals who do not identify or do not feel strictly male or strictly female, and they are considered non-binary. Now, if a person feels like they are male sometimes or they are more like a female other times, they are often considered gendered fluid. And this just describes the way that the individual feels. I feel that a lot of people, especially cisgender individuals, have this concept that gender refers to the biological sex. So I think it's important to understand that when we talk about sex and gender, we're talking about two different things, and to make the clarification of what these terms mean. Gender fluid, non-binary does not have anything to do with the biological sex of the individual. It has a lot to do with the way that the person feels and the way that the person identifies with and their self-concept.